how many rape cases have eyewitnesses? In our client's complaint against Tate, there's eyewitness accounts from one of our clients seeing and hearing the assault of the other. Then our third client, who also went to the police, she was in a relationship with Tate. She has voice notes, text messages from him saying, "I love raping you." Tate seems to have, from the evidence that we've seen, a particular affinity for that sort of abusive conduct. Also, it needs to be said that some of the physical assaults had absolutely nothing to do with sex. They were just a way of him asserting dominance over them while they were working if they weren't doing things that he wanted them to do. And so you think, well, how much more evidence would be necessary to pursue a prosecution? And indeed, the police have confirmed to us that they believed there was enough evidence to pursue a prosecution. They handed the file over to the CPS, and it was the CPS who decided to take no further action.
What does this say about how we're willing to treat some of the most vulnerable people in society in terms of sexual assault? And what does the CPS have to say for themselves? What have they said? Do you think that if this had been nipped in the bud and sorted, a lot more damage wouldn't have happened in Romania?
Well, that's certainly true.
Barely any heavyweight journalists have really brought any of the most compelling and damaging pieces of evidence to his face. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, but the most shocking one of all, Piers Morgan. It was so soft you could actually take a nap on the interview. Like, your whole religious spiel of identifying yourself is not real.
It just doesn't match with the previous statements. Now he is very aware of the risk that's posed to him by his previous statements, the courses he taught on pimping hoes.
He's on a redemption tour.
Yeah, exactly, and he's trying to pivot, and I think he's doing it quite successfully, into a different space where he's being seen as essentially the protector of traditional family values. That's not who he was before he was arrested. Before he was arrested, he was extremely open about the fact that he designed a business which had made a lot of money for him, which was designed to exploit women who were working for him. Frankly, anything he said post-arrest is completely irrelevant in my eyes, because that's when he's started censoring himself.
Welcome back to the Sexonomic podcast today. We are here joined by Jack Beeston. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Just to explain to the audience who you are, you represent the McEwen Jury law firm who are representing the UK case of the women with cases against Andrew Tate, correct?
Yes, that's right.
So what can you tell us about internationally what cases are going on? What do they consist of? And specifically the one you are representing?
Sure. So, appreciate it's quite complicated. There are, at the moment, 3 live investigations or court cases against Andrew Tate, and then in some other instances also Tristan Tate and 2 other of their associates in Romania. Mm-hmm. So I think the Romanian case is the most well known, so I'll talk about that first. Andrew, Tristan, and 2 of their associates in Romania are accused in Romania and awaiting trial for crimes related to rape, human trafficking, and forming an organised crime group. That relates to a number of victims who were in Romania over the last few years. There is also a entirely separate British investigation, which is being conducted by the Bedfordshire Police, and that relates to, I believe, around 20 counts of rape and human trafficking against Andrew and Tristan Tate. And that has only recently come to light, and the Romanians have granted an extradition request to the UK, which means that at the end of the Romanian proceedings, including if the Tates go to prison, they will then be rearrested, extradited to the UK, and then will face trial here for those allegations.
So it's a double whammy.
Yeah, so we've got a group of victims in Romania, a group of victims in the UK, and then another group of victims, a third group of victims, who went to the police in 2014 and 2015, and their case dragged on for 4 years and was eventually dropped by the Crown Prosecution Service. And they are the women that my firm, Hugh Jury and Partners, represents, and they are now bringing a civil claim, so not a criminal proceedings. They're bringing a civil claim for damages, so for compensation from Andrew Tate alone for the personal injuries that they suffered, including rape and other physical assaults. So you've got, taken collectively, 3 entirely separate groups of women. There's no overlap, as far as I understand, between any of the cases, who have all made allegations against Tate, Andrew Tate and Tristan for a period of nearly a decade. So I think the earliest allegations are from 2013 and the latest are from 2022, when he was eventually arrested in Romania. So it's, the scale of this is massive. And I mean, I should also say that they haven't been found guilty of anything in any jurisdictions, because, I don't want to present them as, as they're completely guilty. There are processes which need to be followed, but the scale of the accusations is massive.
Of course, everyone is going to have their day in court.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain to the audience who might not know the difference between civil and criminal in the UK?
Sure. So criminal law is one individual commits a crime and the government prosecutes that crime. So the police make an arrest, the police conduct an investigation. If they think that there's that they have a reasonable prospect of a conviction, they then pass the case file to the CPS, which people might have heard of. It's the Crown Prosecution Service, and the CPS will then prosecute the alleged offender, and he'll go to court, or she will go to a criminal court where there'll be a criminal judge and a jury, and they will determine whether someone's innocent or guilty. So that's kind of what you see more on TV and stuff like that. The civil cases are designed to sort out wrongs which people have done to each other in a direct way. So if I have a contract with you that I don't fulfill, and you say I owe you £100,000, you can take me to court directly. So the government is not involved in that process. And the intention is to compensate someone from the losses that another person has caused.
So is this in terms of Andrew Tate maybe duping the women who were doing webcam work out of money? Because I understand not every woman in this case is webcam. Yeah,
so civil cases can also, and in fact most of our work at the firm that I work for, concerns things which are also crimes. So you could theoretically get hit by a car by a drunk driver, and that's a crime. That person can go to prison, but if you can't work anymore and all those sorts of things, you can also sue the person who hit you with their car so that they give you compensation. So the civil law and the criminal law are separate, but they intertwine. So our client's hope would be that if they're successful in the civil proceedings, it will provoke the police into reopening their original investigation, because they have major concerns about how that investigation was conducted and the way in which it was dealt with. So this is a kind of last resort for them. They wish, that when they went to the police almost 10 years ago, this had just been dealt with properly, but it wasn't, and so they've had to look at other alternatives.
Well, I want to kind of wind it back to 2012 to 2015. We know that Andrew Tate fled to Romania because he thought the laws were less stringent.
Mm-hmm.
And now, ironically, I think they want to make an example out of him, and rightly so, if what's alleged is true. But in 2015, the Hertfordshire Constabulary case initially carried out an investigation.
Mm-hmm.
At that specific time, what was the sum of that case?
Sure. So I think the first thing to say is that the Romanians are it's not that they're making an example out of Tate. They're just doing their job, and they're doing it diligently in a way that the police, frankly, should have done in this country. So we represent 4 women. 3 of our clients went to the police in 2013 and 14. So their stories are slightly different, so I'm just going to separate them out. So 2 of them were recruited by Tate to work in his webcamming business. And during the course of a very short period of time, it really didn't work for him for a very long time, but he physically assaulted both of them on numerous occasions. And
in what way?
Strangling, hitting them with a belt, verbal aggression, all of those kind of traditional types of assault.
So for the audience, like choking, it can sometimes lead to subconjunctival hemorrhages in the eyes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what happened in this case. Yeah. Unfortunately, and I appreciate it's upsetting to talk about, Tate seems to have, from the evidence that we've seen, a particular affinity for that sort of physically abusive conduct.
And he's trying to counteract this now in the court of public opinion by saying, oh, you're kink shaming me. Well, no, sex is based on consent. And
exactly.
If those women weren't consenting.
Yeah. Also, it needs to be said that some of the physical assaults had absolutely nothing to do with sex. They were just a way of him asserting dominance over them while they were working if they weren't doing things that he wanted them to do. So just taking it back a step. So there were physical assaults, and then there were also in one of our clients' instances, 2 instances of rape, one of which was witnessed by our other client, and another she witnessed the aftermath. So
this is also that accounts are told on a documentary, I believe.
Yes, I think quite a lot of this material is already in the public record.
And can you just briefly also explain why they are granted anonymity, especially by the UN?
Sure. So if you are a victim of sexual violence, you are, under the criminal law, entitled to lifetime anonymity. So there are very good reasons for that. One is that sexual crimes, above all else, I would say, they're unique in that they carry with them a great deal of shame sometimes. People can be, on the one hand, embarrassed by what happened. They can also be, deeply ashamed, very scared. I think there are so many myths about sexual violence which pervade the sort of public discourse about them. People think, why didn't they go, why didn't someone go straight to the police if they were raped? Why did they stay with their abuser if they were being abused? All of those sorts of common narratives. And I think people still think that rape happens to women when they're out on the street and they're, grabbed by a person they don't know and then assaulted.
In an alley.
Yeah. The vast majority of rapes and sexual assaults take place within existing relationships with people they can take years to process, very often tied into very complicated psychological trauma, coercive and controlling behavior. It can become normal within relationships. So all of these things are working together in a really kind of insidious way.
Just to give an idea of size of the problem we're facing, the Tate is one case, but this is an international problem. But in Wales and England, rape crisis, they report 1 in 4 women have been raped or sexually assaulted as an adult. So that's 6.54 million women in total. And then also 99% of rape victims reported to the police don't end in conviction.
Yeah.
Is that quite into the stats you would expect?
Unfortunately, it is. Most of the time with rape cases, it's one person's word against another
in a confined area.
Yeah, so you have, it happens in a relationship, in bed or at home or something like that, or you go to a party or with friends, etc. That's the most common situation. And so you don't have witnesses unless it's extremely violent. You don't have kind of evidence of struggle and those sorts of things.
Unless you go the day after and you take a test.
Yeah.
Which I forgot the name for it, but you can go immediately after and take a sexual assault test. But still then, the fact that, you have maybe semen inside of you is not enough to prove you.
Well, it proves you had sex.
It proves you had sex, but doesn't prove that it was forced.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why they're so difficult to prosecute. In this case, I mean, how many rape cases have eyewitnesses? In this case, in our client's complaint against Tate, there's eyewitness accounts from one of our clients seeing and hearing the assault of the other, right? So that's extremely rare. Then our third client, who also went to the police, she was in a sort of relationship with Tate. She has voice notes, text messages from him saying, "I love raping you."
Yeah.
And they, these...
This is public as well.
That's in the public domain as well. And so you think, well, how much more evidence would be necessary to pursue a prosecution? And indeed, the police have confirmed to us that they believed there was enough evidence to pursue a prosecution. They handed the file over to the CPS, and it was the CPS who decided to take no further action.
Because they were sex workers?
I think there may, this is purely speculative. I think
it's
the world...
questions I want to know the answers to.
I think the world has changed a lot in 10 years.
Massively.
In terms of talking about and responding to sexual violence. I think it's those steps have largely been positive. The police have been criticised at length, and the CPS, for the way that they treat victims, the way that they prosecute cases, an obsession with victim credibility rather than the hard evidence and testimony. So all of those things come into play. I don't know why the CPS chose to take no further action. I don't... the reasons that they've provided don't make any sense. And I do think it was a combination of things. I think, one, they were... there probably might have been a bit of kind of bias, and whether that was conscious or unconscious. I think the investigation dragged on for a very long time, during which time Tate left the country. He moved to Romania in 2017 in the middle of this investigation. So my thought was that they thought, well, he's gone. It's been going on for 4 years. We're not going to get him back, etc. He also, at this point, was not a public figure unless you were very into a specific area of martial arts. Yeah. He wasn't. He wasn't even influencing fully then. That came, I think, 2019, 2020 is when he really rose to prominence. But he certainly wouldn't have been known to the police as a kind of public figure at that point. He went on Big Brother in 2016.
And he'd been on various reality shows before this.
Yeah, it's evident that he
likes fame.
He's obsessed with it. He's obsessed with money and fame.
And he is the front man of this operation. And one thing in the documentary that Matt Shea does on the BBC is that it's not just Tate.
No.
It's not just Tristan.
Yeah.
There's like a larger agenda behind it. But I do want to stay on this kind of case of, what happened in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the CPS didn't take it further. So these women are feeling very left down. And
yeah,
for the ones who are sex workers, What does this say about how we're willing to treat some of the most vulnerable people in society in terms of sexual assault?
Yeah.
And what does the CPS have to say for themselves? What have they said? And also, do you think that if this had been nipped in the bud and sorted, a lot more damage wouldn't have happened in Romania?
Well, that's certainly true. I mean, so hypothetically, if the police had pursued a swift prosecution, if the CPS had charged, and if the court had found him guilty,
because there is enough evidence there.
Yeah, in our view, there absolutely is. Yeah. Then there never would have been this whole Romanian saga, and also the rise on the internet of Andrew Tate and all the problems that that's come with would not have happened. So, you know, we are now as a society desperately scrabbling around for ways to combat this extremely negative and kind of pernicious narrative that Tate represents. I'm not saying it's just him. There are lots of misogynist influencers.
A lot of people tacking on to his persona because it's audience sharing.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it's also just it's the oldest trick in the book. It's saying you're not happy with your life. It's not your fault. It's these people who are telling you that you have to be, you know, you have to be liberal. You know, it's not. And
which is ironic because he spouts on taking accountability when you're actually running away from your own problems.
It's a completely classic victim mentality, and it's the kind of mentality that gets weaponized time and again. So whether it's, you know, historically, whether it's immigrants are taking our jobs, it's not the oligarchy who are harming you and not paying their taxes and stuff. It's the immigrants because they're an easy target. You know, historically, time and again, it's always been the Jews who've been targeted. Or now, you know, it's the same. It's you're not happy with your life, and I have all the answers if you just believe me and follow me. And it's, you know, it's very see-through, but it works time and again. And, you know, it's being weaponized in every aspect of society.
Does Tristan Tate have just the trafficking claims against him, or does he have the assault?
So there are no accusations in our case, in the civil case against Tristan. I want to make that very clear. Mm-hmm. It's just against Andrew, that case.
But he's more kind of charged with the organisation.
He is involved. I don't know the exact specifics, so I don't want to kind of spread misinformation about the 2 criminal investigations in Romania and the UK. All I know is that he is a named defendant in those. But
his behaviour also is kind of out there and very public.
Mm.
You know, there's a pop star in Romania. And do you remember that song, Mr. Saxo Beat?
Yeah.
Alexandra Stan. He allegedly, I have to say allegedly, leaked nudes of her many moons ago. Probably dating about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
This was when they moved over to Romania to kind of build their brand. And if you kind of add up the reality shows, I'm not saying everyone who goes into a reality show is a bad person, but this kind of idea of going on these multiple reality shows, publishing a famous person's nudes to attach clout to yourself.
Mm.
Like, it's obvious that they've wanted a taste of fame, and I actually think it's one of their weaknesses because they can't help themselves.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is seeing the difference in their behaviour pre and post arrest. So pre-arrest, they were very, very brazen about what they were doing. They were, you know, totally outrageous in their statements, in their, you know, the brag about, you know, there's this archival footage of Andrew Tate. First of all, there's archival footage of Andrew Tate assaulting women.
With the belt.
There's one with a belt, and there's another where there's a woman who locks herself in the bathroom and he's threatening her. There is statements about, you know, if you have to, fuck them to make them love you. You have to choke and hit them, etc., to make them compliant.
This
really
was part of his PhD pimps and hoeing degree.
Yeah, exactly.
Instructing people how to sex traffic.
Exactly. And
copy and paste.
Since then, post arrest, clearly he's taking legal advice from people who are saying you can't keep incriminating yourself in this way. And now he's kind of gone down this sort of rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. He's aligning himself with right-wing figures, right-wing conspiracy theorists, and also jumping on every single sort of cause of the day, whether it be, taking a pro-Russia stance on the war in Ukraine. He's aligning himself very clearly with kind of conspiracy theories and really hamming up the kind of I'm the victim,
playing into the narrative.
Exactly, playing into the narrative that he's been creating.
Trying to get into his mind, what do you think is going on? I mean, I'd hate to be his lawyer, but what do you think is going on in his mind when he flippantly kind of goes, what evidence is there? What evidence is there? That could have been a fake video, or that could have been a fake clip. He's not stupid.
Yeah, but you just throw enough mud at the wall
to plastic minds,
and people believe it if they want to believe it, and they don't if they don't. And the hope with this case is that if we're successful, we're never going to change the minds, I don't think, of the people who follow him avidly and who think that everything is a government conspiracy, and there's a kind of grand plan in society to hold men down and replace them with whatever.
So he's accusing of the world being a matrix and a system where you're trapped and you're enslaved and you get what you're given, but yet he's creating a platform that is a system where you kind of forced into it and manipulated.
Yeah, you just replace your belief in the standard things that you're supposed to believe in, democracy, freedom of speech, the public mainstream press, etc., and you just replace all of that with a belief in him.
Well, it's interesting what you said about kind of how he's aligning himself with right-wing and different figures, because there's a benefit in that. There's safety in aligning yourself with the right people.
Mm-hmm.
But barely any heavyweight journalists or podcasters have really brought any of the most compelling and damaging pieces of evidence to his face. A big theory is, obviously, when you're doing interviews, people can strike things off of what they don't want to speak about, especially if it's a legal thing. I don't want to put myself in hot water.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to run through some of the larger names that have kind of been tied into him, and some might make you chuckle because it's a given.
Yeah.
But he definitely cherry picks who he gives interviews to. Like the BBC one got cut short, I think. But Tucker Carlson, Tucker, I'm not surprised, he's a gonzo journalist, avoided putting any kind of legitimate claim to Andrew Tate.
I think journalist is quite a big word for Tucker Carlson. I'd say,
He looks like the pigeon man out of Home Alone. And then Candace Owens, the woman is smart again, but clearly we know that, the husband is friends with Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
And she said the definition in the various cases are sex trafficking is stretched. No, coercive behaviour is coercive behaviour. So she missed on taking him to task on his pimps and hoe degree.
Yeah, but why would she? What's the benefit to her, I think,
Well, it makes her look stupid because she's obviously anti-porn, that's her through and through. But you're not going to really take him to task on that. That woman can go for something if she wants to go for it, but she's chosen not to. She also used the argument of the blonde lady defending him and doing a video saying, the belt incident was just fun and games. But we are in a case where he is being accused of manipulating women and probably paid her off. That's my assumption. And also, if you kind of get onto podcasters, there's one called George Janko. He used to be friends with Logan Paul. George wouldn't identify as a journalist, but he kind of does upstand a moral standard, and he doesn't even challenge Andrew when he says, I've never had a negative interaction with a woman.
Yeah.
And then there's Patrick Bet-Davis, who basically, I'm going to be really rude, gives him a rim job in his interview because he's so closely connected with him in business.
Yeah.
That when Tate's stock price goes up, Patrick Bet-David's stock price goes up. That's how this works.
Yeah.
But the most shocking one of all that I just kind of squinted at was Piers Morgan. I thought he was going to salivate at the chance of putting the most damning pieces of evidence against him. But it was so soft you could actually take a nap on the interview. Like, I don't really understand. Why are they not holding him to account with correct journalistic integrity? Less so Tucker Carlson, but more Piers Morgan.
Yeah. I can't answer that. I mean, I think the reality is you're not getting an interview. You know, he's not going to be interviewed by
Jeremy Paxton.
He's not. He's obviously not going to volunteer for that, and he doesn't live in that world either. You know, he's famous.
Sensationalism.
Yeah, but he is. You know, we would allege, seeing the evidence that we've seen, he's, you know, a criminal, and he's a criminal who's obtained a huge amount of notoriety. He's not, you know, he's not a figure of political importance. He's not. If he's arrested, everyone will, you know, very likely forget. Sorry, if he's convicted, everyone will very likely forget who he is in a few years. Like, I think he's terrified of that. But he has quite successfully aligned himself with a kind of alternative journalism, which is, you know, basically counterfactual, counter public narrative.
And also, Patrick Bet-David hails from a pyramid scheme himself.
Yeah.
So, you know, minds alike kind of work together. But it's just shocking that no one's really taking him to task.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's varying degrees of journalists or podcasters I've named there. But even someone like Chris Williamson, I know that if we're going into the whole pill ideology, people would consider him maybe more of a purple pill. But that man also is intelligent to know what is wrong and what is right, but he would never say it's wrong and believe that he's a sex trafficker and a rapist, because it's damaging for his brand. Because a lot of these influencers, there's the bubble here of Andrew Tate, Chris Williamson is over there, and then in this middle there's like Patrick Bet-Davis, and then Andrew Schultz there, who's more of a comedian. But some of these bubbles overlap in audiences, and they don't want to take the risk or the hit or blow up their channel, which I understand if you've worked so hard for it. But, you know, we're all comfortable calling Jeffrey Epstein a paedophile and a sex trafficker. And
that, you know, that's the point of our case. That's the point of it's a big point in the criminal proceedings, is that, you know, it's about vindicating the position of the victims, but it's also about, you know, having bringing some finality and some clarity to the whole situation, saying, no, this is actually what happened. This is the truth, and stopping this kind of whirlwind of tweets and misinformation and fake, you know, accusations of fake evidence and all of this stuff, which is totally bewildering if you're trying to get, you know, your head around everything. But it's all a complete distraction, and that's the point. It's distracting you from the reality of the situation, which is that there are 3 court proceedings taking place in 2 different countries concerning 3 groups, independent groups of women who all make similar sorts of accusations. And he points to that and says it's all a conspiracy. I look at that and I think, well, this is a method of operating of, you know, criminal activity over the period of, you know, a decade. And it's, you know, criminals tend to tend to keep doing what they're doing until they get caught generally, you know, and actually the scale of it just expands.
Well, I think as well, people who have kind of a more rational idea of it, who say, oh, well, I don't know much about it, but what is alleged seems kind of effed up. You know, for them, it's just it's hard to know what to believe because there's all this misinformation, which brings us down to kind of breaking down Tate's public defense tactics and controlling the narrative, which is a big part of his defense. Because in my eyes, I'm not a legal person, but, you know, with the evidence, I think it would be quite easy to prosecute. You know, I say that, you know, but he uses this method of kind of controlling the public narrative, and it's a weird thing because in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case, no matter what side you were on, you could definitely say that the public opinion was a big factor in that. So, you know, seeing that, obviously Tate can apply this here, especially, you know, when there's kind of ideas of bots and coordinated attacks on different pages, but we'll get into that. I want to break down his kind of response when people ask him about the Romanian case, and he just says, oh, I helped a few friends make a few TikToks. And he kind of trivializes what's going on. Can you address the mechanics, kind of what is behind that?
Sure. So obviously without having, you know, had sight of the full case file and stuff, I can't speak for certainty. What I can say is that there was an operation going on in Romania which centered around primarily a webcamming business. Romania is the European, maybe even the world capital for webcamming. So Tate's had already started a webcamming operation in the UK. That's not in dispute. That's a fact. They then left to go to Romania and quickly established themselves webcamming there. So there have been leaked documents from the war room chats where it's basically a how-to guide, and it's like we have to, I think the phrase is slave these bitches. So
I've got like a quote directly from Tate, not the war room, but it gives an idea of mainly I'm going to slave these bitches. I'm going to make them work even more hours and hours and hours. I work these bitches like slaves. Slave work, slave is in capital, minimum 10 or 12 hours a day.
And that method of operating is exactly what was experienced by two of our clients. So you attract women, vulnerable women generally, who, you know, often come from very poor backgrounds. You know, Romania is not a rich country. It's surrounded by countries like Moldova, you know, Ukraine, etc. Where women are extremely vulnerable. So you attract them, you bring them to your house, either under a false pretense, for example, the commencement of a romantic relationship.
Lover boy method.
Yeah. Or they come knowing exactly what they're going to do. And then you just work them all the time. You keep most of the profit, and they're, you know, unable to leave. You control every aspect of their life. You cut off, you try to prevent them being friends with each other. You use other women to kind of marshal and control them. You know, he didn't invent this. This happens all the time. You know, on one extreme, you know, in extreme cases, you'll have someone come and their passport will be confiscated and they'll be, you know, threatened physically and not genuinely essentially held and forced to work. Or you have this kind of slightly looser false pretenses of inviting someone to on the idea that it'd be a relationship, and then you get them webcamming, and there's so much material in the war room logs about how you get women to start webcamming for you, how you get women to tattoo your name on themselves. You know, it's so clear that the whole kind of war room ideology and reason for operating was professionalizing the exploitation of women, often who thought that they were in a relationship with you.
At the end of the day, I think anyone can see where this comes from is insecure men realizing that women, for some reason in this world, they've been given the realm of having more marketable sexual IP than men. Sorry, that's just the way it is. But they've found that they can choreograph this sexual IP and exploit it, essentially, which just says more about their willingness to deprive these women of their liberty in order to get whatever they want by financial means. You know, you've mentioned the branding with the tattoo, you know, the isolation, the financial manipulation, the threatening, you know, and people wonder why victims find such a hard time coming forward. It's embarrassing to admit this. I feel embarrassed to like admit to someone touched my bum on the tube. Can you imagine for someone who's sexually harassed or assaulted or raped, you know?
I mean, this is just a non sequitur, but I don't know if you've been watching on Netflix recently the show Baby Reindeer.
I've seen it on Twitter trending.
Yeah, so it's, without spoilers, it's a real life experience of a man who is seriously sexually assaulted and then subjected to some stalking, and he goes to the police, and the first question the police ask him is, you know, why didn't you report this earlier? And he explains very clearly, I think, the kind of shame that people go through. Obviously, if it happens to you as a man, you also have kind of ideas of, you know, what men should and shouldn't be. But
there's this idea of like, you can only really have sex if something is, you know, hard, but it's not like that, you know.
Yeah, and also, and just ideas of, you know, the ideas of what men should be doing and what women should be doing, and the way they should act. And if, you know, if you're a woman and you are assaulted, it's your fault, kind of thing.
With your clients that you're representing specifically, have there been any obvious or non-obvious smear campaigns targeted towards them? And if so, what detriment to the case does it hold?
Well, there's been a lot of misinformation spread about the case generally. You know, the first obvious one is that Tate was cleared of all charges, which just isn't true. The case never went to court for, you know, for the reasons we discussed, and, you know, because the prosecution, in our view, wasn't pursued properly. That's not the same as being cleared. It just means that the police or the CPS can't deal with it or won't deal with it for one reason or another. We have obviously preserved their anonymity, which they're entitled to. And that has meant that they haven't been subjected to the same level of abuse and harassment and threats as the victims in the Romanian case have. So Tate has actually sued in America 2 of the women who were involved in the Romanian proceedings for defamation for $5 million, including trying to sue every single member of their family. And Tate is on the record on an interview a few years ago saying that if you cross him, he is prepared to tie you and your family up in court proceedings for the rest of their lives, to spend $1 million just so you lose one, but your life is on pause while you fight every single, you know, he's
vindictive.
He's vindictive, and he also has, I don't know, 8 million followers on Twitter, lots of whom are,
Do you think it's really fully 8 million humans?
I mean, probably not, but there's a lot of them, obviously. And, we've been subjected to abuse as the law firm. Journalists are subjected to abuse. Matt Shea, you mentioned earlier, has been subjected to, constant harassment. And so people often ask the question, why are our clients anonymous? To which the answer is, well, why on earth would they come out and subject themselves to, stuff which has nothing to do with the legal case? If you're anonymous, the reason it's there is to help you live your daily life while also dealing with something that is extremely traumatic and carries with it all the shame and embarrassment and all those things. It has nothing to do with, subjecting yourself to a public campaign being made against you. So, their anonymity is
paying out of their own pocket for this case.
This case is being crowdfunded. Yeah. So they have a crowdfunding page on a website called Crowd Justice, which your listeners can find if they're interested in.
We'll plug it in at the end as well.
Yeah. So, this is not a money-making operation for anyone, really. And it's about vindication, and it's about, them now seeing what's happened, seeing that there are other victims out there, and saying, actually, what happened to me was wrong. I'm pissed off at the police. I'm pissed off at the CPS, and I'm going to do something about it. And I think that's a very admirable thing to do. Yeah,
I think this case definitely does kind of act as a marker of what we're going to tolerate and what we're not going to tolerate in 2024, 10 years later. But I want to kind of divert our attention over to something we just touched on of, are those 8 million followers real people?
Yeah.
Tate has had rumours surrounding that he, farms bots,
mm-hmm.
And that's how he kind of does a lot of his coordinated attacks. And then obviously there's the Hustlers University, essentially, of, you subscribe to his Hustlers University, and you get a percentage of the next subscription,
mm-hmm.
which is like a pyramid scheme. So you're incentivized to make these propaganda videos,
yeah,
or attack, like an attack dog,
yeah,
wherever Tate sends you in whatever direction, to counter any kind of negative criticism of Tate.
Mm-hmm.
We might get a few on here, so hi. But just in terms of if, he is brought into court in the UK, is this just a tactic that is kind of brushed off? Or is it something, if there's a jury that could sway a jury, is it even a jury that he would face, or a judge?
So in the civil case, it would just be a judge.
Yep.
And that has some benefits in that judges are not going to be concerning themselves with the Twitter discourse.
No.
They care about what's written down on the paper and the evidence that's produced and
their own credibility.
Yeah, and they have a kind of extremely in-depth knowledge of the law and what is and isn't relevant. So this kind of public, the kind of public discourse is going to have absolutely no impact, I would hope, on what a judge will do or say.
From a society point of view.
Yeah, it could certainly impact a jury. There is that risk. There's always that risk with juries. They're trying to select the jury for the Trump trial at the moment in America, and it's proving very difficult because everyone has an opinion on Trump. It's really hard to be unbiased. So yeah, I'm glad that I don't have to deal with that problem.
Well, in terms of his credibility, I'm going to
mm-hmm.
throw it back to him saying, I was just helping a few girls or friends make some TikTok videos. Why would Andrew Tate, with, he's kind of said, I'm a billionaire. He's not a billionaire.
Yeah.
But Andrew Tate, the billionaire, so wealthy, be incentivized to help girls make TikToks for free. He's clearly about his business and everything comes at an incentive. What is in it for me?
Yeah.
How does he expect the public to swallow that up when we know that he's obviously doing it for some kind of financial gain?
Yeah, but also he's
10 years ago, he said 10 years ago, I gave up the webcamming game. You started the webcamming game 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And okay, maybe it's not traditional webcam now. You're filtering it through OnlyFans and these various other online things. You're still in the online sex space.
Yeah.
Like your whole religious spiel of identifying yourself with Islam or his brother with Christianity is not real.
No, and it also, it just doesn't match with the previous statements. You know, now he is very aware of the risk that's posed to him by his previous statements, the courses he taught on, you know, pimping hoes. So,
and he's on a redemption tour.
Yeah, exactly. And he's trying to pivot, and I think he's doing it quite successfully. He's pivoting to a different space where he's being seen as essentially the protector of traditional family values, and, you know, being attacked for that. That's not who he was before he was arrested. Before he was arrested, he was extremely open about the fact that he designed a business which had made a lot of money for him, which was designed to exploit women who were working for him. So it doesn't, frankly, anything he said post-arrest is completely irrelevant in my eyes, because that's when he's started censoring himself and you know, pivoting to this other persona. But it's just nonsense.
There's two different personas. There's the machete pimping, aggressive, bullish side, and then there's the messiah, the guru, who, you know, whatever. But Matt, in his documentary, brings on a whistleblower who used to be quite high up in marketing in Hustlers University, or the War Room. I'm going to say the War Room. And he speaks of how when kind of these court cases came to light, that the marketing strategy obviously shifted, you know, and that's where you get this more kind of stoic and virtuous Andrew Tate. So again, check it out if you need that reference. Another thing to kind of touch on is how he is painting out the women who opt to do this work. So whether it is sex work. In my field, I've worked with a lot of Romanian women and have asked them around this kind of their opinion around this case, and how do you feel that, you know, Tate portrays Eastern European women who get involved in webcam, and they're horrified at the stereotype they're given of being weak, vulnerable, easy to manipulate women. Like, you try working in a strip club with like 50 Romanians, it's not easy. They're strong women. So it's just also this idea of weakening women and, you know, who they are.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the alleged victims are from various different countries, various different backgrounds. They all got to different stages in life, having had different experiences, and no two experiences are the same, and the way of, you know, the coercion and manipulation will be slightly different for everyone. So, you know, it's where you've come from doesn't.
Someone who isn't vulnerable as well, who, you know, is a successful webcammer.
Yeah.
If Andrew Tate came along and saw, oh, she's making, he wouldn't, because she's already successful.
Exactly.
But let's say if he did, she'd tell him to fuck off.
Yeah.
I don't need your help.
Yeah.
You know, but it's this idea of making someone feel that you need their help.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, as I said, I know it's a hot topic to question someone about their faith, but it is almost uncanny that he takes this kind of Islam approach of affiliating himself with Islam, and Tristan's taken a Christian affiliation. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not an expert in either Christianity or Islam. I think the lives that they have led would run counter to, the teachings of both of those faiths.
Core values.
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't want to speculate on whether his conversion to Islam was legitimate or a protective tool, but what I can say is that if you look in comments where Tate has been attacked on Twitter, there is a certain portion of Muslim men who will defend him just because he's Muslim. They think that it's an extension of Islamophobia, which is obviously a very serious and completely separate problem. There's just it's losing the grey of life. It's putting people into black and white, easy to distinguish pots, where there's a very simple narrative that Andrew Tate is being attacked because he is a traditionalist and a conservative and Muslim. Tristan is being attacked because he's a traditionalist, conservative and Christian, without putting them in the context of their actions and their the allegations against them.
I'm not saying anyone in their faith needs to be perfect, but it's the whole I'm a changed man spiel. Yeah. And I'm saying that I think he makes a mockery of the faith and the religion that he thinks he's part of. Something I want to touch on as well before we kind of get on to the next section is a man called IGGY. Mm-hmm. Do you know his surname? Because I don't want to butcher it.
SEMMELWEIS, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
He goes by a few names. Has he had any charges?
Not that I'm aware of.
Why?
I don't know. It would be a matter of evidence.
Almost, I don't want to say worse because it's just as bad, but...
Yeah. The whole kind of, all the characters behind the war room have gone a bit quiet recently. I haven't heard much from them.
We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. I don't know what he's doing. I obviously saw the BBC documentary where he appears.
Should we give the audience some context to who he is?
Yeah, I can try.
He's a wizard.
He's a self-styled wizard who was
a pimp.
Yeah, I guess part of the war room, kind of shadowy figure.
And a pimp before he was in the war room.
Yeah. He's got some pretty crazy views. I can't really say more than that. He's just he looks like you'd expect a wizard to look.
In the war room, though, he is the one who is kind of leading the pack on, get a tattoo.
Yeah, I mean, there was kind of a group of 5 or 6 of them who were all, the kind of core of that organisation. I mean, I don't know whether the war room is still having their cigar and tight trousers meetups anymore, but presumably all this, all these allegations against the Tates have caused a bit of problems with that.
And the pimps, and from Matt's documentary, it's clear that the pimp and hoeing degree got taken away off, what was Hustlers University Real World, but It's just kind of been thrown back into the war room at an upper echelon, and it's probably, I don't think it's called pimps and hoeing. I don't know if it is or if it's not still called pimps and hoeing, but that's an integral part of you belonging in the war room.
As far as I understand it, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I think. So, in case people aren't familiar with this kind of insane world, there's what used to be called, I can't even believe I'm saying it out loud, Hustlers University, which is now called The Real World. Anyone can join that. I think it's like $50. And it's kind of a weird content creation platform, which I think also is a pyramid scheme, as we discussed, and we made that point to Google and Apple, and they agreed and took it down. So I would argue that it was a bad idea to join The Real World. But the idea, as far as I understand it, again, is that kind of funnels users up the pyramid, and you can then join the war room, I think, and I don't know if it's invite only or whatever, and that is kind of much more of a black box. Anyone with $50 can go and find out what's going on in the real world. The war room is kind of, I think it's basically you just pay a huge amount of money to be on some WhatsApp groups, And, you know, you talk about business and cigars and cars and also, you know, quite serious sexual crimes.
I think that Texas guy, Jay Waller, he's like I don't know, part of like promoting it. But the thing I did want to ask was, with this kind of criminal activity happening in the war room, in theory, could those people be brought to account legally?
If they've committed crimes, they could.
If the person wants to put that forward.
Yeah. I mean, you know, anyone who makes an allegation against, you know, anyone can come forward with crimes at any point. There's no like stopwatch on when you can and can't report allegations of rape and human trafficking and stuff like that, you know.
In the UK, do we have a statute of limitations?
No, not for sexual violence crimes.
It's clear when Andrew Tate is kind of commanding these war room sessions that there's actually like a twinkle in his eye that gives him some kind of meaning and validation. So on some level, I think he knows that he's a bit of a grifter. Well, a large grifter. But I do believe he like drinks his own Kool-Aid and actually thinks he is top G. Like, I think he does have a messiah complex, which I think will be his downfall ultimately, because he's not willing to part ways with it to see the logic and the facts of the situation. But we'll move on to Tate's demeanour and character and kind of who he is or how he presents. A lot of this is obviously with like a lot of traditional masculine traits, so like bravado, and he kind of wears his sunglasses and his skinny jackets and maybe roided up. I don't know. I didn't confirm that. But in terms of what he's giving out to young disenfranchised men of what is a man, how harmful do you think that is?
I think that is, so, you know, obviously you have individual people who've suffered huge amounts who are bringing these allegations forward. Yeah. And that is incredibly serious and, you know, a massive concern. But I think, you know, perhaps even in terms of society as a whole, the fact that these messages are filtering through and being directly targeted at young men and schoolboys, I think that's a concern for absolutely everyone, because if you have that kind of situation developing, and if you have a generation of young men who think that, you know, misogyny is the right way of things, then we're going to start taking some very, very big step backwards, and it's going to be of danger to young women as well. You know, we have to consider that. So I think that is a massive concern. And, you know, we've spoken to organisations who are trying to combat misogyny in schools in the UK, and they're saying we won't send individual women into schools anymore to talk about this because they'll, you know, because there's actually a physical danger to them. You know, we're having to send people in 2s and 3s and stuff like that. You talk to any teacher, even in primary schools, you know, it's that is the target audience of his message. And, you know, if you're being cynical, you'd say it's because, you know, actual adults can largely see through this kind of messaging, but the more vulnerable of us can't. And I think that is a massive concern and something that we are not taking seriously enough as a society.
I mean, what he is selling essentially is the hyped up version of a teenage boy's fantasy, essentially. That's the front face of it.
Yeah.
To lure people in.
And, you know, people say, oh, well, he has positive messages. He's saying you should work out and you shouldn't drink and all that stuff. Fine. I'm not saying those are bad messages.
He's not the only one to preach. He's not the first person.
Yeah, he's not a fitness influencer. right? There are plenty of them already. And, you know, if 14, 15-year-olds want to like eat healthily and go to the gym. Yeah.
People,
yeah.
The chocolates is something we're not going to explain right now, but you can like research it yourself.
You know, if 14 and 15-year-old boys want to go to the gym and eat healthily and be nice to girls, that is great. But it's that last bit. It's the weaponization of all these ideas of, you know, women are stupid, they're inferior, they work for you. You shouldn't give them any agency. They should, you know, be subservient to you at all times. And, you know, as we've seen in the previous videos, if they step out of line, you have to be sexually or physically violent towards them. And the sex is reduced under his old messaging. Sex is reduced only to a tool of control. You have to have sex with women so that you can control them. You have to be physically threatening so that you can control them. It's just control.
I think if we zoom out and look at what has happened in the past 10 years and kind of put Tate to the side for a moment, the big movements we've had, METOO and Time's Up, are really great movements. And I don't think there's a woman who couldn't say that has positively not affected their life. However, as one side swings, it always goes the other way like a pendulum.
Yeah.
And I do think the vacuum was there and the stage was there ready for him to take, in a way.
Yeah.
Because whilst we have, you know, even since the vote and, you know, women going out into the workforce, we've accelerated, and there's arguments of, you know, maybe we have left men behind, or, you know, we've kind of not moved together. So it's very hard to speak about in a case where we're obviously, you know, representing women who are victims. But I think we have to be a little bit honest about the conversation we're having in regards to, have we left men behind and have we actually given them good role models? Because I don't think we have necessarily.
Well, it's interesting you said that, because one of our big frustrations with this case is that, you know, people don't want to hear from the lawyers. They want to hear from, you know, people they already know countering the countering the narrative, and not a single man who hasn't had some vested interest in it has stood up and said, actually, Andrew Tate isn't the right role model. You know, try to counter the narrative. The only people who argue with Tate online are people who he gets in dumb Twitter disputes with over nonsense, you know.
There was a good Danny Dyer documentary that came out recently that does give a good broader picture.
Yeah. So I think that my own view is that it's not about women leaving men behind. It's men's job to catch up. You know, we've had and
we can move together.
Yeah, of course, but you know, the world doesn't stay static. And the revelations which came out during METOO were absolutely horrifying. And I think most men were asleep and didn't realise what had been going on. Some probably did know and didn't think it was that big of a deal. Others were actively participating in, you know, the sorts of abuse which took place.
And it made them shit their pants a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not complicated. And actually the previous world was much more insidious and much worse. And it's not difficult to learn and to change. Some people are incredibly resistant to it because they feel it's a threat, but the progress on questions of consent and stuff like that is not a threat to men.
No.
Certainly shouldn't be perceived as such. And weaponizing it, you know, Tate was very, very clear in previous statements that, you know, post METOO, the West is, you know, if you're a man in the West, you're fucked, because anyone can come out with an accusation based on nothing and you'll get thrown in jail and your life will be ruined. And then he points to all of these, you know, allegations against high profile men.
He kind of said, oh, they did it to P. Diddy a year ago, and now he's cussing out P. Diddy to suit the narrative.
Yeah.
I find something that is very kind of revealing about how much people know on this case is I ask a lot of men in my job, oh, what do you think of the Andrew Tate case? And they ask me, do you think he's innocent? Do you think he's guilty? And everyone is innocent until proven guilty.
Mm-hmm.
But a common theme that I see, and I would say probably like throughout 100 people, because that's how much I ask the question, is I ask them, oh, do you think he's innocent or guilty? And they say, oh, I think he's innocent. I don't think he's sex trafficking. And I say, well, can you tell me the definition of sex trafficking? And they think it's this idea of maybe being slammed into the back of a van and kidnapped and forced to work in a warehouse where you're essentially doing sex work. Or they can't even tell me a very basic legal definition of sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. How can you advocate for someone's innocence when you don't even know the definition of what they're being accused of? I think that shows such a vacuum of men want a role model to believe in that they're just taking anything that comes their way, the first one that comes.
Well, I mean, it's, you know, I think knowledge of the law is very important, and particularly in questions of, you know, consent. There will be young women and men walking around today and they will have had an unpleasant sexual experience last weekend, and they won't know that they've actually, you know, legally that they've been raped, or that they've been, or that what happened to them was, you know, a very serious crime. And you see that all the time. And that is a failure, not on their part, that's a failure on the world which doesn't teach them that, you know, teach them properly about consent. And this is also changing massively in schools now, which is great. When I was at school, and I'm 31 now, when I was at school, our sexual education was basically, if you have sex, you're going to get a girl pregnant and you might get a disease, and that was it. That was the end of pretty much the end of the conversation. And that's not important to young people. What's important is that young people are going to have sex, and when they do, they need to make sure that it's done safely, but much more importantly in a way which is, you know, mutually, in which consent operates in two different directions, and it's, you know, you would hope a pleasant experience for everyone
you would hope
involved.
Even if, you know, you go on a date and you go back to a flat and, you know, the assumption is you're going to have sex, and before you start, the woman or the man feels a bit uncomfortable, that person would go, are you okay with this? You don't seem right. That the emotional intelligence would be there. But I think the emotional intelligence a lot of the time is there, but they just don't care, so they try and override it because it's sex and that's what they want at the end of the day. I've obviously worked in an industry where I've been kind of treated almost sometimes better in a way in a strip club in terms of like consent and boundaries and, you know, what's appropriate and not, compared to my school days, because in school, like, people have no concept of consent and boundaries. And that was the most shocking thing to me, I would say, and would be shocking to other people. But it's a very difficult conversation to have. I want to move on to Pavlovian conditioning and how that has been manipulated in the war room, and how this kind of brushes off to young men as well.
It sounds like you probably know more about what's going on inside the war room than I do, to be honest. My brief in the case is just to bring the strongest case that I can in relation to the very specific events. And this being Andrew Tate, it's dragged, we've been sucked into lots of other things, but I'm not sure I could.
But the tactics that are used in this specific kind of, conditioning is stuff that's kind of translated into your case in terms of minimizing support structures, creating dependence on abusers, conditioning individuals into subservient behavior.
Yeah.
I think, those kinds of things don't come into people's minds when they think about grooming or sex trafficking.
No, they don't. And I think what we're trying to do as well with this case is highlight this concept, which legally is a relatively new one, of coercive and controlling behaviour. And you can look up the legislation. It's came out in 2015, I think. I can't remember whether it was a standalone piece of legislation or whether the crime was part of a wider bill. But there are indicative behaviours. I think there's 26 indicative behaviours. And one of them alone may not be, that serious, or one alone might be very, very serious. For example, one of the behaviours is the use of sexual violence. But it's taking all of those indicative behaviours together and using it to influence, control, and coerce someone who you're in a relationship with. So, for example, the classic examples are alienating someone as quickly as possible from their friends and family, using the language of relationships and,
alienation is 101 of an abusive relationship.
Yeah. Financial control, threats. So those are but then there are other kind of more everyday behaviors, and you combine them to manipulate someone, basically. And that's how you get them to do what you want, and you make them think that they can never leave.
And just because it's this group of behaviors doesn't mean that it's happening in smaller homes and not just in the Andrew Tate case.
If you go through those behaviors and you read them, you will probably recognize some of those behaviors from most relationships.
Yeah.
Maybe they're on a very low level, but they are things that people do in relation. And this is why but it's only when it's when they're taken to an extreme degree or combined with lots of other things that you have the offence being committed. And what's so kind of insidious about it is most of the time people won't be able to realise what's happening as it happens. It's only once you're able to extricate yourself from that relationship, or people in abusive relationships will often have a moment where they think, if I don't get myself out of this, I'm gonna die. Or I just can't go on like this anymore. And then they're able to pull themselves out, and then the kind of full weight of what they've been through impresses itself on them, and then they think, actually, what happened there may have been criminal, and then they go to the police. And so this idea of, why didn't you go to the police the first time he hit you, or the first time he raped you, etc., and it's just not that simple.
I think the image I'm getting is a lot of legal systems around the world aren't really in the favour of the person who is the victim. No. One thing I do want to touch on, which is maybe a little bit more salacious than serious, is his kind of cosplaying of wealth. Because obviously when the Romanian police kind of arrested, was it Didcot that kind of arrested him?
Dicot, yeah.
Dicot. They kind of seized all his assets, took all his cards and stuff. So in theory, from what I understood, he has no access to any money. But who is supporting him if his assets were seized? And is it true or kind of feasible that Andrew Tate has some kind of sugar daddy, ironically?
I really don't know about that. I mean, what I do know is that even if
the money's coming from somewhere.
Money's coming from somewhere.
It's like 600k Romanian warehouse.
Yeah.
That is not a mansion.
No, I've been outside it. And
is it tacky as looks?
It's like a an old warehouse or factory on the edge of Bucharest. So it's like it's kind of on a bit of a cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
On the edge of a suburb, basically. So on one side is like fields, and then the other side is like housing. And it's clearly was an industrial building originally, because it has like a kind of what would have been used for like lorries, kind of like a courtyard or something, and then the building itself seems to have no windows from the outside. I haven't been inside it, obviously.
But it's the thing I've wanted to get to the bottom of. Like, how is he financing himself, or does he?
So I think lots of his assets have been seized by the Romanians. Many of those assets were then returned, not to him, but to their actual owners, because they were being rented. So like cars and stuff, I think.
So he's not actually...
I mean, I think he is. I'm speculating on his finances when I don't know. I think he is a rich man. I think the idea that he's a billionaire is laughable.
He's very voyeuristic with his wealth.
Yeah, he leads a kind of influencer life. It's the kind of Dubai, the private jets, the yachts, the cars, the houses, the penthouses, all that stuff. You know, that's you need money to live like that, obviously.
Crypto lifestyle.
You rent, things can be rented, other things can be bought. I have no idea how much he actually owns or where it is. You know, clearly he has money and is living on money, and he's not it's not completely artificial, but I do think it's inflated.
But it's interesting when you meet very wealthy people can be very out and gauche with it. But sometimes when you meet some of the most wealthiest individuals, they're in shorts and flip-flops.
Yeah, I think
and that's
probably
because
right.
They don't feel the need to compensate for something. Andrew Tate definitely feels the need to market and compensate, especially if you look at his background of coming from, you know, Luton, from, you know, quite, I would say, a poor background.
Mm-hmm.
So like he is going to be gauche and throw it in people's face to a degree.
Yeah, and also, you know, if what you're selling is, you know, live like me, subscribe to my channels, subscribe to my apps, etc. That doesn't work if you're, you know, sat in your mum's house, or you're talking to people from a room above a shop or something like that. That doesn't work. You have to be, in order to get people to follow you, you have to outwardly display wealth, because that's what his followers want.
Do you think, like, in a brief or a full Tate's supporter mind, you know, we spoke about METOO and Time's Up, when they see Tate being kind of arrested and taken away, there's an element of, oh shit, it could happen to me. Someone could throw allegations against me. So I have to do everything I can to protect this man or this messiah I believe in order for it to ever stop happening to me, because that's definitely the message he's portraying.
Yeah, and, you know, I think...
It's just like a means for, you know, like sometimes what's happened and some of the more terrible things, like in this case that have happened to women, we forget that, you know, they kind of try and justify their own means by gaslighting and trivializing stuff.
I mean, I think, you know, if you're a 14-year-old boy and you're worried about being falsely accused of rape, first of all, the instances where genuine false allegations are made as vanishingly small when compared to the actual, the actual crime itself. If you're a 14-year-old boy and you're really worried, read about consent, learn about consent, find out what you should and shouldn't do, and be nice, be polite, don't be forceful. And if you're still falsely accused after that, then you are extraordinarily unlucky. So, you know, if that's genuinely the concern, is that a woman is going to come for you and destroy your life for no reason, then it's pretty easy to guard against that. If it's something wider about the fact that maybe you actually just want to do what you want without ever facing the consequences of your actions, then I'm afraid you can't really be helped, because, you know, actions do have consequences. And, you know, if you go around committing offences, this is a hypothetical situation, but if you go around committing a bunch of crimes, it's not impossible to think that one day those crimes might catch up with you. So particularly if you boast about them online.
How in the legal system do we get better in regards to women not being believed and men being falsely accused?
There is a lot of work on legal reform taking place at the moment, dealing with the way in which sexual crimes are prosecuted. And I want to make it really clear, this is not a man-woman thing. You know, many men are raped and sexually assaulted. I think it's something like 1 in 28 men will be. So obviously it's skewed towards women, but it's not. This is a universal problem.
So if we change that to someone not being believed and someone being falsely accused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the false accusation thing it's the thing which most pisses me off, I think, because it's just so rare. To be clear, being falsely accused is not the same as someone being found innocent. So being falsely accused is like, you know, is different, and is extraordinarily rare. That's not the same as someone being accused and evidence being presented to the court and the jury finding that person not guilty. That's just them being found not guilty. It still might have happened, obviously. I think the single biggest reform that needs to be made is the treatment of victims as they go through the criminal justice system. And the reason for that is that you hear time and time again, I went to the police, I was treated like I had done something wrong. I was, I had my phone taken away from me. I had my private life picked through. I had, people requesting my notes with my therapist. Every aspect of my life. You finally go to court. It's probably taken 5 years to get there. On the eve of the trial is vacated and moved to another time. You upend your life again. Then you finally get there and you get savaged by a barrister. It's incredibly intimidating and frightening. And then you probably, police probably lose the evidence and the finding is not guilty, and you have spent 7 years of your life not recovering, and it's all been for nothing. And you would never advise someone to do the same thing. And that is
a liar.
And that is obviously that maybe is an extreme example, but that story gets told again and again and again and again. And the system has to change to make it easier for women to come forward, because as we said earlier, these are crimes where there is, they're by their nature personal and traumatic. And, we consider murder to be the worst crime that there is. But actually, if you kill someone, yes, it's the end of their life, but they don't have to go through living it every single day. If you rape someone, they live with it every single day. It can impact all their future relationships, their ability to love, their ability to, form meaningful connections and be intimate with people, which is kind of the point of being alive. Like that's, it robs you of that very kind of essential element of living, which is, being able to love someone and feel safe with someone and all that stuff. So it can do totally irreparable damage, and these things aren't spoken about enough. And also the criminal justice system makes things worse for victims rather than better. And so, speaking to our clients who went to the police, I do not think would be able to, in good conscience, recommend that someone who had had the same experience went to the police and reported what happened to them. And I think that is such a bad position for us to be in as a society, because the conviction rates are already through the floor and the reporting rates are really low as well. So the majority of rapes don't even get reported. And you look at the stats that you read out earlier and you led to the conclusion that rape is essentially legal.
I did a podcast episode last week about Sexual Assault and Harassment Awareness Month. And a woman made a point of how she was sexualized more as a schoolgirl because, you know, it's accepted from adults and then it's kind of pushed onto younger girls. And what you've just said has made me think about what kind of safety are we giving to especially young girls who don't even know about consent and boundaries. And I remember when I was sexually assaulted for the first time when I was 17, I was so scared of telling anyone that I froze, and I just thought, like, I'm going to be considered a liar because I was wearing a top that was like a bit low. Yeah. And it's just such a hard pill to swallow, because imagine if you know, in this case, something did happen to me, and that was my biggest fear, that I would be told by not only, you know, the school or, you know, the legal system if I reported it. I didn't even know this was just before METOO, that it's something I could really take to task. But for a split moment, I thought, what if my family don't believe me? Yeah. That's the most heartbreaking thing. Yeah. Because not all families are on the same page about sexual
of course
assault.
Not. And, you know, that's why these conversations need to happen and people need to... And, you know, I'm happy to admit that, you know, through this case, I've learned a huge amount. You know, this is not something that you either know everything about or you don't know anything. You know, it's a constantly evolving process. And, you know, what I would say to people is, even if something's happened to you a long time ago and you don't want to fully report it, you should still tell the police, and they will make a note of it on their file. That person won't be prosecuted for anything, but if it happens again, then that will be there. And I think that's the hardest thing for our clients, is knowing that they did everything that you're supposed to do. They went to the police, they reported it, they did everything they were supposed to do. The investigation was bundled, and then all the stuff came out about other crimes which have been committed. This Bedfordshire investigation relates to the exact same time period, the same sorts of crimes, the same area of the UK roughly. Like, this was all going on and it could have been stopped, and that is what kind of lives with people, I think. So, you know, it's just so depressing to see victims failed again and again and again, and then the situation blow up to the point where now people are taking action because it's a big fucking problem, which could have been avoided many years ago if people had just done their jobs properly.
It doesn't make the CPS look good, but in terms of, you know, the cases against Tate with your victims, from watching the True Geordie podcast with a colleague of yours, Matthew, I'm trying to understand, in terms of inside of the charges, how do we equate, you know, the rape cases in terms of, does the evidence amount to rape, or like how is it kind of measured up from a legal standpoint in terms of what does a judge need to convict someone?
So again, in the criminal law, you have to prove beyond all reasonable doubt to a jury that the offence was committed. So there can be evidence takes many forms in that regard. It can be, you know, physical evidence collected from the victim. It can be messages between them. It can be live witness evidence. So people who either saw it or who were, they're called disclosures. If you go and tell your friend what happened to you, you're shaken up and all that stuff. That's all the kinds of evidence that you would have. And so it's obviously very difficult to then persuade a jury that it happened beyond all reasonable doubt if it was just the two of you in a room, even if you then go and tell your friend that he raped me and stuff like that. So that's why the conviction rate is so low. And just in defence of the police and CPS, for a second, they've failed a lot, but it's not as easy as saying they are completely in the wrong, because they are operating constantly on a position where they never have the resources to properly do their job. So they're always making decisions about what cases to bring forward and what cases not to. And they're always going to pick, slam dunk cases. And slam dunk cases are often not sexual assault and rape cases. They're just, by their nature, there is more doubt. And so they make decisions based on that cold calculation. And that's not, that's obviously unsatisfactory, but I can understand why they do it, because they have been always asked to do less with more. Sorry, more with less. Always been asked to do more with less, and no one ever does more with less. You only do less with less. So if you underfund the court system, if you underfund the police, if you underfund the CPS, it leads to longer waits, it leads to lost evidence, it leads to victims dropping out because they can't deal with it anymore. It leads to badly paid, overworked government lawyers. It leads to barristers who can't get on top of their briefs properly because they don't have the time, etc. And the whole thing just grinds to a halt. So it's not a matter of just like hiring 10,000 more policemen and that will fix the problem. The whole system is being cut.
Yeah.
And so in the civil world that I live in, we have the same evidence. We present it not to a jury but to a judge, and then the judge makes a decision, and that decision's on the balance of probabilities. So that's a slightly lower standard of proof. And if our clients are found to have succeeded in their claim, it's not going to result in Tate going to prison for those crimes, but it might be we would have done half the work for the police and the CPS, and then it will be their decision about whether to take it forward.
I'm surprised that NDAs haven't really publicly been a thing in these cases, because with sexual assault and rape, in Hollywood it's a really common, NDA thing. There might have happened, I'm not sure what was offered. Just because like an NDA is legally offered doesn't mean it's offered behind closed doors. I think with this blonde lady who kind of came to Tate's public defense, she might have not signed a legal NDA, but there might be some kind of insurance policy there. But it's hard to know what's going beneath the surface. I think a really good point to make in terms of, anyone who is just really hell-bent on professing Tate's innocence without looking at the evidence. And something I've learned to kind of ask people when they say, oh, he's innocent but can't tell me the definitions of what he's been charged against, is, if you're so hell-bent on Tate's innocence, would you be so quick to leave your daughter or sister alone with him? And the answer is always no, I would never. So what does that tell you about him?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just kind of almost like a smoking gun to answer your own question in a way.
Yeah. I agree with that.
We're wrapping up now, slowly. But what measures could have been taken place in regards to the Hertfordshire case with Tate?
I mean, I would have...
If we could turn, not to quote Cher, but if we could turn back time.
Sure. I think the main thing was speed. Our clients were kept in the dark about the status of the investigation. It was closed, then it was reopened, then there was, someone went away and the case was picked up, and it got the impression, and we all have work like this, where it's just not your priority, and you constantly say, oh, I'll get around to that next week, and it doesn't happen. I mean, I don't have any insight, but I feel...
Do you think they're a bit embarrassed by it?
I wouldn't want to speculate, but I think if there are convictions in Romania and Bedfordshire, it will look very bad.
Yeah.
That's my sense. And I think if you delay investigations, and if there's an old saying, which is justice delayed is justice denied. So if you keep putting things off, they wither on the vine, basically. I think that would have been the main thing for me. I think obviously letting him go to Romania was a bad decision. It's quite clear that he left partly as a result of being arrested. And so I don't know what conditions were attached, but they should have moved faster, basically.
It's a very random thought that I'm having right now, but he has a sister and a mum, doesn't he?
Yes.
I believe. I wonder where they are in all of this. And I know that the father is a very precarious character. He's dead now, but from what I understand, the sister doesn't associate with him.
No, I think
she's a lawyer, actually.
I think, yeah, from what I understand, she's a lawyer in America and is, fairly well adjusted and kind of
not associated.
Left wing, and they've kind of, there's some footage of them sort of taking the piss out of her for that. Their mum, I don't know.
Well, my final question to you is, how can we help women who are victims to this type of behaviour and rhetoric that Tate has done?
I think the first thing to do is to realise, unfortunately, not only are you not alone, but that so many people have been through similar experiences, and that there are some fantastic resources available to people. I mean, you mentioned Rape Crisis UK. There would be an obvious one. Yeah. Sorry, Rape Crisis Wales and England. They are fantastic. I think talk to your friends. Talk to professionals. Try to be in a position where you're in a group of people who are, try to force your friends to be open about these sorts of conversations. And I'm talking to men here as well, probably more so actually. These sorts of crimes exist in the space between reality and what we're comfortable talking about. And I think that lots of these serial offenders would have been stopped if people had been more comfortable and felt able to talk about what happened to them. And that is a huge step to take, but it's better to take small, gradual steps that you're comfortable with. And also, if you have been the victim of a crime, try and get some legal assistance as well, because having someone to guide you through things can make it a lot easier. And actually, one of the big criticisms of the system as it operates in the criminal sphere is that victims are often prevented from taking their own legal advice. And personally, I think that's insane. But
it's an oxymoron.
Yeah. Well, it's like the argument is that the government is your lawyer, or the government represents you, but they don't really. They're concerned with their case and the conviction, and that's fine. But the victims are separate and should be supported. Just to give a shout out to an organisation that we've come across and spoken to, etc., is the Centre for Women's Justice.
Oh yes,
they are. Yeah, they're really wonderful. Rape Crisis is really good at this, at dealing with victims as well. So there's, there are people out there and there are organisations out there who can help. But, it's really difficult.
I think what you said there is so true. And if I could summarise it or paraphrase it, is let's get over the cultural taboo of ick around sex and sex crimes.
Yeah.
I think this is kind of where this problem lies, within the ick, because no one wants to speak about it. But thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking your time to come down here, especially with the busyness you've got on. I just want to make sure that we're linking the crowd justice link. I've got it here. Do you want me to read it out?
Sure. Yeah.
If you wish to donate to, well, fund this case, please go to www.crowdjustice.com/case/Andrew-Tate-accountable, and then it's another /, but you can also Google it and I think it'll come up.
Yeah.
We'll leave the link in the bio. Thank you so much, Jack.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.